Okay, everybody, today we're going to be talking about Williamson County Park, or Wilco, which is located north of Austin, west of Round Rock, east of Cedar Park, kind of on the border there. And I wanted to do something a little bit different today. Wilco definitely has the reputation of being a lefty course, and as a left-handed player, that's a discussion I kind of like to have. And so I wanted to examine sort of each shot, each hole, and kind of go over what's the right way to play this hole? How is it designed? Is it neutral? Does it favor left? Does it favor right? I'm going to do it for each hole and kind of give the whole course a score. In general, if you're going to play this course, I would say this kind of targets the advanced level player. There's, right to left, left to right. There's some blind shots. It's kind of technical in the trees. So this is a really good course, one of my favorites. I like to play it a lot. I think this is definitely a course that's going to challenge your game no matter how long you've been playing disc golf. If you're new to disc golf, maybe you want to pick some of the other courses in the area to get your feet wet, but this is one that you should be coming back to over and over again. Okay, right off the bat, hole 1. This is probably one of the signature holes at Wilco, just because of this crazy tree configuration that you're going to have to navigate through. You're going to have to pick one of the gaps here and hopefully make it through. Sometimes I see people try to take something really overstable and skip around the right side of the trees, which is an option if you're right-handed. But for the most part, you're just trying to hit one of these gaps. And if you can hit it, it's really not that hard of a shot at only 239 feet. In terms of left-handed, right-handed, I think this is basically a neutral shot. Maybe some of the gaps might be a little bit easier to hit left-handed. Right-handed people have that option to go around, but it's pretty neutral. Okay, hole 2 is definitely a challenging hole, but it's a hole that I've really come to appreciate over the years playing here at Wilco, especially as I've watched my game grow, and so my execution on this hole has definitely improved over time. The first shot is definitely going to be right to left. You're going to have to miss that tree on the right side, and you really want to end up left of the tree down on the fairway to set up your next shot. But the second shot is probably going to favor a left-handed player since it plays left to right, conversely, and you're going to hopefully end up on the green on your second shot. To end up with a putting opportunity, both your first and your second shots are going to have to be executed pretty precisely, which is why this is one of the par 4s on the course. But it is an achievable 3, and I've done it many times. But one of the cool things about this is that it requires you to make what is traditionally thought of as a right-handed shot and a left-handed shot back-to-back. And so as your game grows, you develop a forehand or a good turnover, then you'll be able to 3 this hole. In terms of our lefty-righty comparison, I'm going to go ahead and rate this as a neutral hole. Right, hole 3, we have a back-to-back par 4 situation, although this drive off the tee is going to be a lot different than the last hole. You've got a relatively low ceiling to contend with, and this tee shot is definitely going to favor a left-handed player. You want to keep it low, and you're really aiming to get up to this clearing out here where the fairway is actually going to take a pretty substantial right-handed turn. Not quite 90 degrees, but it's pretty sharp. A left-handed player should be able to get a skip if they use a driver and shave 50 feet or so off of their second shot. The approach is going to be relatively neutral. It's kind of a tunnel shot, but it's wide enough to where it's not, completely cramped on either side. But either way, you're still going to have a low ceiling to contend with towards the end of the fairway as you get close to the basket. It may be an option to go over the top of the trees, but probably not if you're going to 3 this hole just for how long the approach is going to be. In terms of neutrality, I would say that this hole leans slightly to the left, but because the second shot's pretty neutral, I wouldn't call it a total lefty hole. Alright, now hole 4 is going to be, again, kind of a tunnel shot. There's sort of an option to go down the far right side, but it's so wide that it's pretty hard to get back over to the basket. So really what you want to do is just put a disc right up through the middle and expect a right to left fade. and that should get you to the basket. So in terms of neutrality, this is going to be a right-handed favoring hole, and there's really not a turnover option for a left-handed player, so it has to be a flick. From that standpoint, I'm going to call it a righty hole. Okay, with hole 5, we've got another par 4. In this one, you're really just trying to get through the trees and get up to the clearing off in the distance. I'll give a lefties the slight nod here because there's a little bit more of a gap through the trees on the left side. So you'll see a lot of people either turn over or flick through the left channel. Of course, the left-handed player can just take the left side. I actually throw over the top of the trees here, but that's not a play that I see anybody else do. But once you get out into the clearing, it's going to be, there's a gap in the trees on the right side with the basket on the left. And so this is once again a right to left approach to get there for the 3. And so I think I'm going to call this a neutral hole again. The drive is slightly left-handed and the approach is clearly right-handed. But I think it's pretty neutral either way. I know I mentioned this on hole 2, but I'll mention it again. I think some of the best holes are holes that require you to throw both left to right and right to left on the same hole, because it really forces you to have variety in your game. That's one of the reasons why I like this course so much, because it's going to challenge you in both directions. Alright, so hole 6 is clearly a left-handed hole. It's 358 feet worth of distance, but if you can throw 358 feet in a straight line and get that left to right finished, which a left-handed player would do, then this is a birdie that can be picked up just by throwing a straight line. If you're right-handed, though, there is enough room in terms of the width of the fairway to execute a turnover, which is nice. Unlike, for example, hole 4, where turnover isn't really an option for a left-handed player, turnover is an option for a right-handed player on this hole. I'm still going to call it a lefty hole and not even a left-leaning hole, just because for a left-handed player that can throw in a straight line this far, it should be a pretty easy birdie. Alright, hole 7 is pretty interesting. It's definitely a tunnel shot, and 275 feet. You've got a pretty low ceiling most of the way, but I'm not sure that one side or the other really benefits from it. There are going to be trees on the left side for left-handed players to deal with, but then if you miss those and you're throwing right hand, you're going to have trees at the end of the fairway that are kind of guarding the basket. So in both directions, it's going to be challenging for either a right-handed player or a left-handed player to get there. If they even throw a straight shot, they can make it through the tunnel and stay out of the trees on either side. But this is a really fun hole. It's a fun hole to 2, but I think it's a neutral hole. Alright, hole 8. This is a double Mando shot. So you have to get it up in between these 2 trees that are coming up here, and then beyond those trees it's going to finish left to right with the basket on the right side. So like hole 6, this one is clearly going to be a left-handed hole, but unlike hole 6, there's really not an option for a right-handed player to do anything other than flick here. I don't really think that it's a realistic option to throw a turnover or an anhyzer without worrying about a lot of cut rolling at the end. So I think this is a clear-cut left-handed shot. Alright, so hole 9 is awesome. It's a par 5, and I'm really going to say that getting the 4 is pretty challenging. The first shot is going to be relatively neutral. If anything, it might favor a right-handed player slightly more. But the main goal here is to get it in between the trees on the right and the trees on the left and up into this clearing off in the distance. If you execute the shot perfectly as a right-handed player, you can get a little bit of skip, a little bit of fade right at the end to cut off some of the corner. But the next shot is going to be almost a 90-degree turn for the rest of the fairway. And then as you can see around the corner here, the second shot is going to be another long, straight, mostly neutral, but slightly favoring a left-handed shot. Because if you're able to, again, get the distance to get around the corner, then a slight fade to the right and or skip to the right will give you a little bit better access to the basket. Your ideal placement for the second shot is going to be right to the left of the tree there in the fairway. And then the third shot, if you're in the ideal placement, is again going to be relatively neutral. Even though this is a very difficult hole, because the first shot plays slightly right to left, the second shot plays slightly left to right, the approach is pretty neutral. I'm going to call the hole itself a neutral hole. Alright, after the huge hole on hole 9, hole 10 is pretty short, just 205 feet, and it is slightly left to right. And so it is going to slightly favor a left-handed player. Really, though, this is not that hard of a turnover shot if you're right-handed. So we'll call this a slight lefty hole. But a turnover shot or an anhyzer right-handed is very possible. You don't have to flick here. One of the easier holes on the course. Hole 11 is pretty easy also. It's just a straight shot down the right side. I think maybe there's a slight advantage to a right-handed player, but this is a pretty neutral shot with a maybe slight advantage to right-handed. 10, 11, and 12 are probably the 3 easiest back-to-back holes on the course. As a left-handed player, by the way, I end up throwing a slight turnover here, and I've almost aced this hole several times. Hole 12 is a really good one to talk about because it's clearly a right-handed hole. It plays right to left. It's not a very challenging hole, but when I first started playing disc golf, this was a hole that I really struggled with because I just didn't know how to go right to left. Now that I've developed my game and I can throw an anhyzer and I can throw a turnover shot, this hole is almost an automatic birdie for me every time. And it's a good example of a hole that can be played by a left-handed player right to left. It has enough room right to left to throw an anhyzer. It has enough vertical space to be able to throw that kind of a shot, as opposed to, for example, hole 4, which is just a tunnel shot that plays right to left, and that one pretty much requires a flick. So it's definitely a right-handed hole, but it's not that hard. Hole 13 is always kind of a relief to me when I get here, because I generally kind of like to throw far, and this is the kind of hole where you can just sort of unleash. Probably a little bit of advantage, slight advantage to a left-handed player because there are less trees and bushes to contend with on the left side, so I can really get a full flight here all the way out to the gap in the distance. But even a right-handed player, it's not that restricted. You can get a pretty good long flight. And you really want, probably 375, 400 kind of distance to get out here to where just in a minute we're going to turn to the right and so that we can access the basket. So because the gap is going to be on the right side, because the bushes and trees are going to be on the right side of the main portion of the fairway, I will say that this one does lean slightly to the left, but it's really a relatively neutral fairway approach, and the basket is going to be a little bit more on the left side, so I think this is slightly favors left, but it's not a total lefty hole. Alright, hole 14, you got another gap right here out of the gate, and in terms of basket placement, it's going to be on the right side again. So because this is a par 3 and it's reachable in one shot, I have to call this a lefty hole. And it's actually a shot that I really enjoy. It's perfect distance for just putting one out there and having it drift right to the basket. It is possible to throw an anhyzer or turnover here right-handed, but clearly this is a shot that favors the left-handed player, and there's no argument about that. Hole 15 is 393 feet, and it's a par 3, so you've got to get there in one shot. And as a result, this hole ends up eating a lot of discs, especially on the right side. You get a lot of right-handed players that overcook their throw and end up off into the trees and the bushes on the right. But in terms of neutrality, this is a total neutral hole. There's nothing right side or left side that's really going to prevent you from getting there other than your ability to be able to throw 400 feet. It's a fun hole. I like this one a lot. Okay, hole 16 is another relatively open hole at 381 feet. But this one plays clearly right to left. There's not really an option for a left-handed player other than a flick, turnover, or anhyzer shot. But unlike some holes, the turnover or the anhyzer is possible because it's so wide open. There's no ceiling. There's no trees to contend with on the right side. It's not a tunnel shot. So all you have to do is be able to get a disc 380 feet to finish right to left. It's accessible in one shot, but you've got to get there in one shot or make a long putt. But in terms of neutrality, this is clearly a right-handed hole. Hole 17 is kind of a monster. It takes a huge drive off the tee pad, and the drive is going to finish slightly right to left, and then you've kind of got a wall of trees on the right side to contend with to set up your next shot, which again is going to be one of those slightly left to right holes where the basket's going to be on the right side. So this is another of the holes that I would say exemplifies a neutral overall experience, because your first shot is going to be right to left and then your second shot is going to be left to right. And it's wide enough from a tunnel standpoint that you should be able to execute a turnover whether you're right-handed or left-handed, no matter which shot you're on. As a matter of fact, I always throw a turnover on my first shot to get around the corner and end up on the left side. Fun story about this hole, I've actually two'd it before, which was one of the things that made me the most happy, just by having a perfect shot on my first one and then kind of a 200-foot throw in. But I say this is a neutral hole. Alright, finally hole 18. Right off the bat, hole 18 is weird because the tee box doesn't really line up with the basket placement. It's sort of angled off to the left. That's just a weird thing. But in terms of the actual play of the hole, it's going to be a relatively easy, straightforward hyzer from a right-handed player. It's kind of neutral in that a left-handed player should be able to make a pretty similar shot. There's just some guardian trees on the left and a little bit of a ceiling on the left side. So I'm going to call this a slightly right-leaning shot, but it's not outrageously difficult for a left-handed player. Alright, so that's Williamson County Park. This is kind of a different review. I might keep doing these just because I like having the right-handed, left-handed discussion. Now, in case you were keeping score, I came up with 7 neutral holes, 2 holes that slightly lean to the left, 2 holes that slightly lean to the right, 3 holes that were clearly right-handed holes, and 4 holes that were clearly left-handed holes. So what that means is that Wilco is a left-handed friendly course by 1 hole. So yeah, Wilco is a great course. You should definitely go play it no matter what your skill level. Keep playing it over and over again until you can conquer all of the holes. And hope you enjoy these videos. We'll keep trying to make them. I'll try to do some more commentary tracks. And yeah, feel free to like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks again.